have lost more hours of paid work, but they've taken on an awful lot more childcare and homeschooling. And now is probably the moment for me to say that my husband is with my toddler downstairs, but he is unlikely to be entirely silent, so apologies for that. And we also know we're seeing increases in housework and just the general stress and strain of running a home under lockdown. And of course, some women are struggling even more than that. We know that BAME women have a much higher death rate, particularly here in London, and obviously that leads to much greater anxieties around the risks to health. We also know that key workers are about 1 in 3 London working women are key workers who will probably have been struggling to carry on working throughout the lockdown. And of course, all of those inequalities that we already had, all of the poverty, this is really just retrenching those disadvantages. In terms of the format for this event, and apologies again for being a little bit late to start, our speakers are going to share their expert insights, and then we're going to get a discussion going and take questions from you in the audience. We're also going to have an option for informal networking after the event, so I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we get there. In terms of questions to the panel, there's a Q&A function in Zoom, so please do use that to ask questions that you'd like the panel to answer, and you can upvote the questions that you like the best. They will float to the top and be the most likely to be answered. Please do that rather than asking similar seeming questions. It makes it so very much easier for our team. If you're following us on Twitter and you would like, following us on YouTube and you would like to ask a question through Twitter, please do so through the hashtag #LDNResponds. And I think that's housekeeping on Zoom is very strange, very different to doing housekeeping in ordinary meetings, so thank you for bearing with me. I think that's all I need to say for now, so without further ado, I'm very pleased to hand over to Rosie Campbell, who's the Director of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's College London. Thank you very much, Rosie.
Wonderful to be here, but I did wonder that Abena might be under pressure to return to the House floor. No?
I'm okay, so it's fine.
You're sure?
Yeah,
okay, lovely. So I'll be very brief. So I'm a Professor of Politics at King's College London and the Director of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership. I've been in post for 18 months, and the Institute was inaugurated 2 years ago. And my boss is the former Australian Prime Minister, Julia Gillard. And she came up with the idea for the Global Institute for Women's Leadership when she was writing her memoir of her time being Prime Minister. And she realised there was a lot of research out there about what helps to support women into leadership, but a lot of it wasn't very widely shared, and there were also gaps in that research. And so our mission is to both share the existing research and to fill those gaps, and to use Julia's convening power to be able to share it more widely. So that's a little bit about us. We are doing research on gender and COVID at present. It isn't London specific, but I think that some of the findings we can take to London and think about how they apply in London. Obviously, we are right still in the middle of the crisis at the moment, and some of our research is ongoing and will be published at a later date. So I'll start by telling you a few brief things about the research we've done now, and then a little bit about what you can look forward to reading in the future. So we've been working with our partner Ipsos Mori, doing polling, looking at how men and women have experienced the crisis differently. And won't be any surprise to any of you to know that women have taken on a higher proportion of childcare during the crisis, with women saying that they spend on average 7 hours a weekday on childcare compared with 5 hours to men. And we know that this has had all the other factors that Claire talked about, that this is embedded within, in the fact that women are more likely to be the key workers, and they're also more likely, unfortunately, to be employed in the sectors that are disproportionately furloughed and disproportionately likely to have a severe economic impact. But what we have here at the moment is just about direct experiences during the crisis itself. So 43% of working fathers say that their domestic responsibilities have impacted negatively onto their work, compared to 32% of women. And we were a bit surprised by that. But then thinking about it and not being able to explore further, we thought this might be because women are more often used to having to try and juggle their domestic experience, their domestic life with their working life. And this may have come as more of a shock to men. And I think one of the things that we haven't heard enough about, and we would love to learn more about, it's the men who did not previously do a large share of the childcare, but perhaps their partner is a key worker. And obviously, I'm talking largely about heterosexual two-parent families here at the moment. That there may be men out there there will be a large number of men out there who've actually had a very different experience and done a lot more childcare than they ever did before. And one of the things I would really like is for sorry, I just got a direct message and I got a bit waylaid. What I'd really like is for some of those case studies to become public and for us to make that part of the debate, because when we look in these average figures, what we see is a disproportionate amount of work women are doing, and it's the same story we hear and we're used to. But actually, there are a lot of men out there who are doing this work, and we should find a way to make their voices part of the debate, which I think would be something really powerful and maybe something the Centre for London can do. Although men say that they feel that the childcare has had a disproportionate effect on their ability to do their job, 37% of women have described themselves as being highly stressed and anxious during the lockdown compared to 25% of men. So women are feeling this anxiety higher. And women are perhaps, again, supported by other research, are more likely to say that they have undertaken community-minded behaviour. So 69% of women have offered to help friends, family and neighbours compared to 59% of men. So rather than reel you off hundreds of statistics that I can give you the link to read at your leisure, I'll just also briefly mention the research that we're doing that we will follow up with after the crisis has moved on to its next stage. So we are looking at media analysis of representations of women during the crisis. So were women put up as experts? Were women's voices heard? When they were put up as experts, which women and on what subjects? And we're doing that research right now, and that will be we'll be launching that towards the end of the month. And then we have a much longer term project that we've just received funding to do from UKRI, looking at the UK government's response to the crisis and whether the gendered safety net is comparing that to other countries globally and trying to see, actually, there's going to be a policy tracker alongside this research, seeing both during the crisis and afterwards, how well are women in particular being protected, and actually looking at the impact both on gender equality in the future and on economic growth in the future. So that's a longer term project that we're starting now. And with that, I will move on and let Abena take her turn.
Thank you so much, Rosie. That was fascinating, and I'm tempted to ask you questions now, as I always am after an interesting speaker, but I will restrain myself and ask people to please start putting your questions in the Q&A. We're really looking forward to seeing them. I think now we're going to move over to Julia Waltham, who I know very well and I'm delighted to be working with again, who's the head of policy at Working Families, who've been doing some really interesting stuff about flexible working through this crisis. Thank you, Julia.
Hi Claire, hi everyone, thanks so much for inviting me. It's absolutely lovely to be here. I'm going to try not to talk for too long as well and not get too incensed about some of the things that I think have gone on since the onset of COVID, and how I think working parents have kind of really been missed out in so many ways. I think just a bit of a caveat from me to start with. I'm talking about parents, but obviously I very often mean women and mothers, but I do always try to talk about parents in the round. So just a little caveat from me. And obviously speakers have already talked about mothers still taking on the majority of the childcare, and it's their ability to work that's been really acutely affected by the pandemic. So just rewind to March. Suddenly, I was at the school gates when I found out there was going to be an announcement by the Secretary of State for Education about schools and childcare settings. And at that point, supporting working parents, 1 in 7 of the UK's workers who are required to provide childcare after the onset of lockdown, absolutely invisible in the government's initial economic response to the crisis. And that's going to be a theme of what I say and will say throughout the session we were treading quite a fine line at the onset of the crisis as a charity. We're all about breaking down the barriers for working parents to getting in and progressing in work. And we really were screaming and telling everyone that we spoke to that it was really important that employers took a really pragmatic approach to supporting parents to work from home, that they should have sensible conversations with their employees about how work can best be organised around their childcare commitments. And you know, many of you might not know much about working families, but we have an employer membership stream of more than 100 UK employers that want to make their workplaces the best in the country for working parents and carers. So we were seeing lots of practical examples of supportive employers coming through. But then we also have a legal advice service. And we, you know, I remember my head of legal telling me about one parent that had rung up and was sitting on the floor crying because she'd been given a laptop by her employer. She worked in a call centre, told to answer every single call that came through, and she had a baby and a toddler in a 1-bedroom flat. And so we very, very quickly realised that we needed to strike a very fine balance between supporting parents to stay in work and to continue to work, keeping them as closely attached to the workplace as possible, but acknowledging that for some parents, their childcare commitments absolutely precluded them from being able to do that. And also, you know, there's another category of parents that could not practically do their job from home, and they couldn't go into work physically because of their childcare responsibilities. You know, and for parents, there was no paid leave entitlement that they could rely on when schools and childcare settings closed. You know, they either needed a supportive employer or to take some kind of unpaid leave, and even that is normally at the employer's discretion. So eventually, after a lot of pressure from working families and other organisations, the government made it clear that employers could furlough staff because of their caring responsibilities. So if their caring responsibilities precluded them from working, they could be furloughed under the job retention scheme. If you remember, in its initial format, you could only be furloughed if your work had gone away or if it no longer existed. And unfortunately, by the time the government made it clear that you could be furloughed for childcare responsibilities, it was too late for a lot of parents who had already lost their jobs. Fast forward a couple of months, the Prime Minister's recently announced that people who can't work from home should return to their workplaces. The vast majority of parents, their childcare arrangements still are not in place. You know, we were then deluged with calls to our legal advice service from parents whose employers were putting them under pressure to return to work, even though they couldn't because they had no access to formal childcare arrangements and informal childcare arrangements at that point. Again, the government have latterly suggested that employers should take a pragmatic approach to supporting working parents who can't go to work because they don't have childcare available. We are pushing the government to introduce a right for those parents to remain on furlough. We also want the government to be really open-minded about the longevity of the job retention scheme. I'm not convinced that schools will all be back in September. Maybe I'm a skeptic, but you know, I think it's going to be tough. And another thing we called for at the beginning of furlough actually was that under furlough you either had to be completely working and not working at all. So there's this really binary choice that employers had. And obviously we know that it's normally women, or the majority of people that get furloughed are women. You know, it was just weakening their labour market attachment. So we really wanted this part-time option, which we've got now. And one of the things I was asked to just touch on is, you know, how employers can support working parents. And I suppose the key thing I would say now is that it would be brilliant if employers could have sensible conversations with the parents that work for them that have been on full-time furlough about what they can do when they come back. Yeah, and just I suppose the other thing I really wanted to touch on was parents that work jobs that are essentially pay-as-you-go jobs. They're you know, they're hugely less likely to have benefited from the job retention scheme. They will have seen their work disappear or have been dismissed because they don't have the right to claim unfair dismissal. And you know, in the longer term, we really would like to see reform of the labour market so that the bias is completely towards more secure work. Insecure work is woefully inadequate to provide stability for working families, and the pandemic has really kind of brutally exposed that. And then just the final thing to say is that, you know, a lot of what I've talked about, you know, furlough being extended, people having the right to remain on furlough, is pushing back a problem really, which is redundancy and women losing their jobs. And what working families would really like to see, and our kind of biggest ask of government, is regulation around the way jobs are designed and advertised. And that's really what's behind our Flex the UK campaign, which Claire just asked me to touch on. We don't want to see a situation post-COVID where the majority of work is being done by a shrinking pool of workers / men. We need more part-time, genuinely flexible jobs that aren't 35 hours a week in the labour market. And that's so, and we need measures, as I said, to rebalance the one-sided flexibility that's become a kind of really awful, in my view, feature of sorry, I've bugged the laptop, feature of our labour market. Now I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Julia. And having talked about children being zoomed bombed by children, I'm sorry, I was just zoomed bombed by my cat. I did not see that one coming. I'm now delighted to hand over to, Abena Oppong-Asare, who is the Labour MP for Erith and Thamesmead. We know that Abena has a really busy parliamentary day today, so we're delighted that she's with us, delighted that she's made time, and please accept our apologies if she has to leave early because of the need to vote in the chamber. Thank you so much, Abena.
Hi, I just want to say thank you for inviting me to speak. I think this is a really important discussion that needs to be had. And I just want to say I completely agree with what Rosie and Julie have said. So I was nodding my head away to that. And also thank you, Claire, for chairing and the rest of the team, because I know it's not an easy job to organise this and get everyone in a room to discuss this. I'm also PPS to Annalise Dodds. So today is the day that the Chancellor has made an economic budget statement today. So we're having a big debate on that in Parliament. So I'm just balancing my duties. I thought I'd start by talking about the issues that I've come across as a constituency MP. So my constituency of Erith and Thamesmead, I have seen an overwhelming amount of cases that have come into my inbox, a lot from women as well, who are working in very different sectors. And as Julia mentioned, most people working in at-risk industries are women. And so I just thought I'd give you some information about the stats in my constituency. So women's median earnings are 40% lower in Erith and Thamesmead than men. As I mentioned, they're more likely to be working in situations than men due to being in low-paid work, insecure work. We have seen that those who were paid work prior to the lockdown. So mothers are 47% more likely than their fathers to have permanently lost their job or quit, and they are 14% more likely to be furloughed. I've seen how COVID has impacted disabled women in my constituency, and I've met with, in my constituency, I've met with Greenwich Association of Disabled People and Inclusion London, and they have told me about the reported rises in costs in relation to their work. One of the things I'm particularly concerned about is how transport has restricted access for disabled people, and that's due to reduced services. I've been contacted by one woman who reported to me she was refused assistance boarding a train due to social distancing rules. So as well as looking at how we can make sure the London recovery is equal, we need to make sure that across the board under the protected characteristics, whether you're disabled, whether you're young, whether you're an older woman, that they aren't being left behind. I also wanted to say that disabled people have told me that they haven't been able to access the government's access to work funding to help them assist in working from home. So they've had to fund for adjustments to their homes to be able to work. This is especially concerning for disabled women, as they're already in a worse economic situation than men, already earning an average of, I would say, about 11.8% less than men. Childcare has been a big issue. So today was the budget statement, and I was particularly disappointed that there hasn't been an announcement for support in the childcare sector. We're about to see about 25% expected to go out of business. And so what we're going to see, as Julia and Rosie mentioned, we're going to be seeing the removal of working women from the workforce. And that to me is particularly concerning. As you mentioned, we don't really want to be moving backwards in time to having a predominantly male workforce, because it's literally undoing the work that we've been trying to do for many years in trying to progress gender equality. This childcare issue is an issue that I feel that the government has missed a trick. They've massively overlooked it. I think part of it's down to the decision making in terms of who is in the room, in terms of the representation. And I do see it in the chamber. So last week we had a discussion on the financial bill, and on and I'm going to get a bit political here, but on our side, I made sure that it was very diverse with women speakers talking about it from across the globe. But on the other side, it wasn't. I would say that in my constituency, I'm being contacted by women who are having to choose between looking after their children or going back to work. And I don't think that's fair. I think that women in particular have done so much for this crisis, more likely to be working on the frontline services and also doing unpaid care, particularly as there's been issues with schools, going back to schools. And I'll say that there's a study that has shown that a proportion of mothers responsible for 90 to 100% of childcare has increased by 27% to 45% during lockdown. I think that's really, really alarming. So from the contact I have with women in my constituency of Erith and Thamesmead, this is impacting them a lot. I think that this is a catch-22 as well, where I've also met with women from creative industries as well, where they haven't been able to find the other support around them, around childcare needs. They're struggling to be speaking to a woman actually just recently who's struggling to feed her two children. And it's just quite alarming that she's been forced to give up her work. I would say that, last weekend we saw pubs being opened and certain businesses being opened, but what we didn't see was areas like nail salons, other beauty places, which are actually dominated by women. And I've received, quite rightly so, many angry emails from businesses and they're all being women about the fact that why is it that you can go to a hairdresser or go to a pub, but you can't go to a nail salon when actually the risks are equally the same. And so in terms of policies, we need to make sure that the policies are equal as well. I'll just quickly talk about what should the policy be in response to ensuring that the gains in women's employment we've seen in the last decades are lost. I'm really, really concerned, as I mentioned earlier. As we all know, the majority of the key workers make up about 58% of in total, and they are getting paid less than £10 an hour, particularly key workers. and especially care workers who have been on the frontline services, delivering a lot of services. And I think this is a time to actually look and recognise actually how much they've delivered during this crisis, and making sure that they are paid properly. I also want to say that we also should look at the people that receive the services of care. You know, I've met with constituents in my in Erith and Thamesmead who are concerned about the fact that the fees would go up in terms of like carers fees, in terms of the level of support. So we need to make sure that both sides don't lose out on that. And you know, as we've seen, you know, for the last few months during COVID, we're all going out clapping for people, carers. But I'm just a bit disappointed that we haven't actually seen a salary increase, particularly for those on frontline services. And I did speak about that last week in Parliament, saying that we should make sure that we should look at 0-hour contracts and look at how we can make sure that women are working in more secure work and making sure they're being paid properly. So I could go on, but I think I might stop there. But I just say that from my conversations with constituents, there are people that are working from home, and whilst they've had the opportunity to do the flexibility of working from home, with some people the conditions haven't been that great, where they've been trying to balance childcare issues whilst trying to keep on working as well. And I'm also particularly concerned about people's mental well-being, making sure that they get the level of support, because I feel that this crisis is going to impact us for a really, really long time. And so these are the issues that I need to look into. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so very much, Abena, and to all of our brilliant panellists for such a thought-provoking and stimulating discussion. We've got some really interesting questions coming up on the Q&A, but you know, the great thing about chairing these sorts of discussions is that you get to ask the first question. So I'm going to use that privilege to ask about how we promote having more mothers in the workplace, encouraging more women into the workplace against a backdrop of rising unemployment. I ask this because, having been involved a little bit in this area, one of the arguments we often make is, well, you haven't got enough skills, so you better bring these women back. So I wondered if any panellists had any reflections about how we continue to promote equality when the number of jobs available is likely to be falling in the short term.
Shall I very briefly? I think I touched on it already in my little diatribe about working parents, but for us, it's never fails to amaze me that all jobs seem to take 37.5 hours a week. I think it's an amazing coincidence that that's for us is the huge barrier. So we would like employers to take a more strategic and organisation-wide approach to designing jobs better. So making sure that jobs can be done in the hours allocated to them, so that working parents are not disadvantaged by jobs that are unwieldy, and can't be done really if you want to spend a little bit of time with your children as well. I talked about it as well, didn't I? And I'm repeating myself, but I think it will be really disappointing if we get to a point post-COVID where unemployment has gone up and working hours have gone up as well, because it's just ridiculous to have a situation where some people will be working all the hours under the sun, and other people aren't working at all. If you take a look at the research that's out there, more part-time jobs are advertised flexibly, but they're also lower paid. So we'd like employers to advertise, to design their jobs properly, come up with more part-time opportunities and advertise all their jobs with flexible working options to give parents in low pay the option to get into more quality work.
I think, I mean, naturally, because this has been so grim in many ways for women, we've focused on the negative. But I do think there are points of optimism that we could harness and we could try and use. Obviously, if you have a job where you can't work from home, some of the advantages that might come out of COVID may not apply. But I think many, many more jobs have a capacity to work from home than we previously thought. I mean, for example, even in some of the most physical industries are realizing that actually you can do a lot more online than we thought. And I think we should start to use tech. We think a lot about the fluidity that employers need. And both Julia and Abena have been talking about 0 hours contracts and that kind of fluidity that employers want. But that fluidity could go both ways. If we use the tech to face the employees and not just from the employer's perspective. I think particularly around nursing, I know there's some initiatives in the UK to create much more innovative scheduling. And I know that 90% roughly of nurses are women, and yet we lose so many experienced women, partly because they're so underpaid, but partly because in many, many nursing jobs, there's no flexibility and you need to do these ridiculous 12-hour shifts. Why is that necessary in nursing? There is absolutely no reason why you couldn't go in and do 3 hours or 4 hours. If we use technology to allow people to plug in their hours and match people up and make things work, we could really solve a lot of these problems in a way that works for employers and works for employees. And I really hope that employers will use this moment when they've had to rethink and invest and think about investing in technology and AI and in their staff, to think of that as a two-way conversation.
Yeah, so Rosie's covered the points that I wanted to raise. I completely agree. I think that before COVID, there was no measures with some organisations to allow people to work from home. And all of a sudden, because we've had no choice to, it's all of a sudden existed and it's happened really quickly. One of the things that I want to say that I'm particularly concerned about is I do think that people have been left behind, those that are not tech savvy. And so with organisations, if they are going to continue this way forward, they need to make sure that they apply the appropriate training and give people the option so they don't feel that they have to work from home, because for some people it can be quite expensive if their workplace doesn't give them support to pay for their broadband or other kind of equipment. I also wanted to talk about the fact that quite a lot of councils in particular have gone digital, and I've heard that all of a sudden they're now kind of removing it and saying that people have to physically meet. And it alienates a lot of women, particularly from politics. And I think it's really important that we do have women in those positions, because then we've got diverse voices speaking on behalf of those individuals in Parliament. I also think one of the things that I would like to see is more investment from the government in childcare. I think that will remove a lot of barriers for women in particular. I also just want to say that whilst a lot of us have been working from home, I've mentioned this already, I am concerned also about people's mental well-being, where, and I know I've done this myself, where because I was at home, I was working really long hours and not working healthily. And I know that has happened to a lot of people. And I've also been contacted by people who have said that it is mentally impacting them. So if we're going to do that, we also need to make sure that organisations also put something in to just address people's mental well-being, so they're not just working in isolation, because before COVID, isolation was on the increase in terms of people becoming isolated. And it's one of our biggest issues that we really kind of need to address. So yeah, that's just a few examples. Oh, so yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention ethnic minorities as well. Making sure that workplaces, look at women's equality is important, but also looking at ethnic minority women as well. There's been a massive discussion at the moment because of Black Lives Matter about addressing unconscious bias, racism in the workforce. It's so important, as well as addressing gender inequality. We also look at the intersectionality of the barriers that ethnic minority women face, because they're most likely to be working twice as hard or in junior positions or low pay. So that needs to be a key factor in it as well. And people that are disabled as well, making sure that they have the accessibility and the support in their workplace.
Thank you so much. Some really interesting responses there, and very conveniently, the question that has been upvoted the most, it's very exciting, this upvoting thing, is about people being expected to work from home. And exactly as Abena was just saying, then being expected to work all the hours. And I worry about people. I always worry when people tell me that they're going to go to work after their child goes to bed, because I think after your child goes to bed, you should either have a cup of tea or a glass of wine. So I wondered if the panelists would like to reflect a little bit on that, and also if there are any further thoughts on equality and intersectionality. I know that data is very new, there's still stuff coming in, but anything from Rosie or Julia's experience that would address those points as well would be really interesting. Going to ask Rosie to go first this time.
In terms of people working from home, I think, well, we know that actually people who work from home do put in more hours, and actually the research suggests that men get more of a financial reward from that than women. I think people who historically, when fewer people working from home, we might think of it as a privilege and then actually overwork in order to kind of show our loyalty to the company. And that overwork's financially rewarded for men, but actually women less so, perhaps because the employer thinks, oh, well, they're doing it for childcare reasons. So I think there is a real danger, and I think employers that are savvy about this make policies around what time it's acceptable to send emails, for example, so that there isn't this pressure of always being on, that there is an expectation that you can go and have your dinner and your glass of wine. I mean, I personally, the way I stayed in the workplace full time when I had young children was by doing what you said, going back to work in the evening, and I felt for that short period when they were tiny, it was worth it. I'm very grateful for my glass of wine and night's sleep now, but I was also very grateful for the employer that supported me to manage staying full-time in the workplace, and therefore being a professor now, and not like so many women academics, not being fully tenured and in insecure work. So I think, it's a balance. It's giving people real flexibility without putting the pressure on to be always on.
Thank you, Rosie. Julia or Abena, anything to add on that?
Just on the home working side, our research had shown kind of prior to lockdown that parents really valued being able to work remotely and to be able to work from anywhere, but they felt that doing that had increased the number of hours they work, and had blurred the balance, the boundary, for them between work and home. I mean, obviously work and home has collided in the most awful or brilliant, depending on how you feel about your kids on a day-to-day basis, I suppose, way. We also surveyed parents recently to mark the launch of Flex the UK, and parents did say kind of unequivocally that they don't want to work from home all the time. They want the autonomy. And I think we are in danger of going down quite a binary kind of working from home or in the office trap. I mean, obviously more parents have been working from home since lockdown, but the other key thing that they've been doing is flexing their hours. And parents don't want to be forced to flex their hours, and they don't want to work from home all the time, but they want the autonomy to be able to do that, and the genuine flexibility to kind of be able to do that. So I completely agree with everything people have said about mental health and well-being, and I know I'm really boring to keep going on about job design, but if jobs are going to continue to be designed in this mad, they're all 35 hours a week and let's just cram as much as possible kind of into them and hope for the best way, then of course parents will be working all the hours under the sun, and of course being able to work from home will exacerbate that.
Yeah, I've covered some of it already, so I'm not going to repeat it, but I just kind of wanted to add as well that there's benefits and negatives to both working from home, but also as well as like parents may be benefiting or not benefiting from it. It will help those that are probably working part-time, or those that want to work flexi or have other issues, because particularly women are most likely to be carers as well. So from people that I've spoken to, the fact that they're a carer and working from home, it helps them. And loads of people have saved money in transport costs from working from home. And actually the air quality, the air pollution has been much more reduced, and it's been a lot healthier. But yes, we definitely need to look at people's mental impact. So in my office, what I've been doing is making sure that, you know, every day we have a call as a team just to tap in to make sure that everyone's okay. And that's also because we're dealing with complex cases where people are going through really traumatic experiences, and I don't think it's appropriate that they're working in isolation without the kind of support. So it's really important that, you know, people have the support in their work roles, and so that would mean organisations having to relook at the guidance they issue, particularly if people were going to work at home, because the guidance that they would issue from those working at their desks in the organisations are going to be very different from if they work at home.
Thank you so much. Some really interesting ideas and challenges and hopes for the future there. As always in these things, I have so many more good questions that we're going to get to. I'm going to ask one more question, which is going to try to kind of bring together a lot of the topics that people have asked about. So sorry, if it's not going to be exactly anybody's question, so sorry about that. We're going to ask panelists to speak for a minute or two each, and then we will do a few final bits of goodbyes and tell you how to join our Zoom networking session afterwards for those who are able to join us on that. So various questions coming in about what does a stimulus package look like? What does a recovery package look like that really supports women? We've talked about green recovery a lot. That's obviously hugely important. I have a tendency to go on at work about an equal recovery. So interested in your thoughts about how government can invest in getting us a more gender equal recovery from this horrendous crisis. And Julia first this time.
Abena's already touched on this, but I just find it hugely disappointing that childcare is not considered part of building better, whatever the kind of narrative is. I think it should be considered to be as crucial a part of our infrastructure as roads and schools. I think, you know, I think that should be an absolutely essential part of the recovery, because otherwise working parents are going to be precluded from going back to work, and that's going to hurt their finances, and ultimately it's going to hurt the economy. You know, I've said already, I think a really important part of us recovering from this is reform of the labour market, so that we move away from the current model, which in my view has, you know, people in low paid, insecure work that are having work done to them, essentially, and then nothing in between, and then people on higher salaries in more secure jobs that are able to enjoy some genuine flexibility but are probably overworked, and you know, and with the people on the other end wanting more work. I think there needs to be, you know, radical reform of the labour market to wean employers off using insecure employment contracts as a modus operandi, which do not work for working parents. As I've said, this pandemic has brutally exposed that, and to, you know, to move away from this. Part-time jobs are rubbish, full-time jobs are, you know, brilliant, and employers putting so much currency and value on jobs that can be done full-time with loads of discretionary hours chucked in for good measure.
Thank you. Abena, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the recovery packet budget for women, just quickly, the childcare, I think there needs to be more support for childcare, which I mentioned earlier, so I won't go into it in detail. We also need to look at the industries where women work in the most, where they need the most kind of support, so there needs to be a better package for that. I also think that statutory sick pay as well. So we've got over 2 million workers not entitled to a statutory sick pay, and over 50% of them are women who are likely to be ineligible for statutory sick pay. So that needs to be addressed as well. And do you think someone mentioned about the green recovery as well? I think this is a topical discussion that loads of people have been having. It's a turning point, I think, for the green economy and the environment, and the women's role issue shouldn't be undermined by the rush to create low-paid, insecure and environmentally harmful jobs. So I think that the role of the economy should be, women's role in the economy should be linked to the green recovery. So looking at social care, we touched upon it lightly about carers, making sure that it's a gender balanced economy. We have an environment where we're creating jobs. And then also I think that we should also be looking at basically making sure that in terms of construction, making sure that, you know, we're building it in a way that we're looking to make sure that women aren't being left behind. But I also think that's what's really important is also making sure that we have women's voices at the forefront, particularly post-COVID, making sure that they are there feeding into the government in terms of what things need to be addressed, making sure things aren't left behind. So for example, select committees, I sit on a select committee, making sure that experts we invite to give evidence, making sure that the panel is diverse and that it's not all men talking about issues that impact women. And then also I'll stop there, but I could go on, but yeah.
Thank you so much, Abena. Rosie, if I could ask you to share your final thoughts fairly briskly, that would be great.
I mean, I absolutely echo everything that's been said. And I think what we need is a new deal for the 21st century, not the 20th century. It shouldn't be about building roads. Roads should be over. It should be about childcare. And it should be about education. We're becoming the most expensive place in Europe to get an education. We're supposed to be in the middle of the fourth industrial revolution. And instead of packaging people into insecure, low-paid, low-skilled work, we should be investing money in getting people educated and trained to do the jobs of tomorrow. And that's how we should be spending this money, on our people, not on building roads.
Thank you so much. And that's an interesting and pertinent point to end the formal part of the discussion. And thank you to all of our brilliant speakers. It's been fascinating. It's been hugely educational for me. I think particular things I've taken away have been about the importance of job design and not just talking about flexible working as if it's the answer. And being flexible about flexible working, I suppose, is a rather naff way to put it. And about the importance of women's voices being heard in decision making, whether that's in Parliament or elsewhere. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us all today. I'm sorry to those whose questions we didn't manage to answer. Please do keep talking to us on social media. We'll try to answer some more of them. We're now going to move to our slightly experimental bit, which is Zoom networking. So if you have registered via Eventbrite, you'll have received a link to a Zoom meeting on your email, which should have arrived with you sometime while we have been talking today. You're very, very welcome to take part. We would love to have you with us. And if you have children, we would love to have them with us as well. Maybe we can have some visits from other people's pets, since my cat has been quite so appalling and as well as invading the screen, always managed to knock over my table. In that email, you'll see there are some security precautions, which are just to make sure that we get you lovely people to join us and lots of other people. So please have a read of those. And then once we start the networking, we're going to ask you to hold for a minute or two just as we open it, so bear with us as we do that. And then we're going to put you into random groups, which is a bit like when you go to a conference and someone says, right, you, table over there, table 7. So you'll be mixed up to talk to a range of different people. This is the first time we've done this as Centre for London, so I'm very excited and I think it's going to be really fun. We're not 100% sure if it's going to work, so if it doesn't work or if things are a bit glitchy, please do bear with us, and thank you very much for being our guinea pigs. And if you can't join us today, absolutely understand. There are children, there are dinners, there are pets, there's other work to be done. We are, of course, doing more work on London's recovery, so if you haven't done so already, please do sign up to our newsletter. I'd recommend it, and follow us on Twitter. And of course, I have to say that if you're interested in funding a Centre for London project, please do get in touch with that as well. Thank you again to our wonderful speakers, and I look forward to seeing you soon.